Lauren Cristella, President and CEO of the Committee of 70. Tell us about the work your organization does.
The Committee of 70 is a nonpartisan nonprofit with bipartisan support that works to explain how our government works so that citizens can hold their government accountable. And then we also help every eligible voter cast their vote, be informed when they vote, and vote with confidence.
How have recent events brought into sharper focus the importance of the work you do?
This is an exceptionally critical time for the Committee of 70. The interest in our organization and our work is almost unprecedented. And we're grateful to be able to provide the trusted resources that people need, nonpartisan resources that explain how our systems work, from elections to basic functionings of government, and then also provide info on candidates and our system.
Now, as you know, Lauren, in 2020, there were challenges to the integrity of our voting system. And would you briefly review those for us?
Sure. There was lots of misinformation and disinformation floating around about the integrity of our system before the election even took place, right? And what we're seeing is a lot of talk about if I lose, then it's rigged, but if I don't lose, then it was a free and fair election. So what the Committee of 70 does is, twice a year, every year, we watch every single election since 1904, right? We started in Philadelphia, we've expanded across the state, and we try to provide that accountability and transparency so that people can trust the process. Right now, we're in the process of making a video that shows what happens after you hand your mail-in ballot in, so that people don't think it just goes into a black box and crates of ballots from China or whatever the last allegation was get shipped in and mess up the count. There are chain of custody issues that are not. There are no chain of custody issues, right? We can demonstrate that through videos like that, and then also through the poll watching and observation process that we encourage people to participate in as well. But in 2020, those accusations were very easy to make, but then it takes a lot of work on behalf of election administrators and groups like ours to dispel a lot of those outright lies. So we're preparing and trying to get ahead of as much as we can this year, and really paying attention to different theories that you see pop up. I think people who are invested in fostering distrust in our elections are trying lots of different avenues and seeing what sticks. So it's our job to make sure that we are meeting every single one of those mistruths, those lies, and addressing them accordingly.
Lauren, one more question about the election fallout after 2020. How are these challenges to the integrity of our voting system met by the courts?
They've all been rejected, right? The courts have evaluated each of the allegations, and not a single one has stuck, because we should have faith in our system. And I'm not saying blind faith. We definitely need to watch, and that's what groups like ours and poll watchers, other people do. But all of those allegations were absolutely discredited.
So, Lauren, tell me more about the task in general of just trying to restore the faith in our institution of voting.
Well, it's so easy to cause that doubt and that fear, but it takes a lot of work to bring people back into a place where they can trust their elections. And I think the way that we get to a place we can trust them is by getting involved in the process. So if you have doubts about the integrity of our system, please sign up to be a poll worker. You can see firsthand what it would take to pull off the level of fraud that's being accused of our election workers. It's just, there are so many checks and balances in the system, from the individual precinct level, right? We have 9,000 precincts in Pennsylvania, all the way up to, to the state level, the certification of our votes, all of that. So we really do encourage people to get involved either as a poll worker or as a poll watcher. There are people who observe the canvassing of votes, like the counting. We encourage people to do that as well, and just find trusted sources of information to dig in a little deeper, and not just say, oh, well, I just don't know, or how can we know, and let that ambiguity sit or foster a lack of faith in our institutions.
Lauren, I'm glad you brought up poll workers because we're going to talk about them for sure later on. But for now, let's talk about mail-in ballots here in Pennsylvania. And of course, as you know, for the last several years, that's been a legal option for voting here in Pennsylvania. And sometimes you hear about processing mail-in ballots. Now, that the word processing, how is that different than merely counting the votes? There's more to it because you actually got to remove stuff from envelopes, don't you?
Absolutely. So in other states that have been using no excuse mail-in balloting for years and years, places like Florida, when they redid the way their elections work after the 2000 election, as those ballots are submitted, the election officials are allowed to pre-canvass or pre-process those ballots. That's not counting them. That's not tabulating them. That's taking them out of the envelopes, taking them out of the secrecy envelopes, flattening them, and getting them prepared to quickly run through the machines. That's why places like Florida have their results on election night. And in 2020, it took until the Saturday after the election to count all our votes. We weren't allowed to touch even the envelopes until 7 a.m. on election day. Right. So it's just too much work. Right. The volume of mail-in ballots so drastically increased in the pandemic that no one could have anticipated, the pandemic when Act 77 was passed in October of 2019. So this scaling up of resources really needed to happen. And we're actually lobbying for that right now to make that change so that the election officials get the time that they need to process those ballots accordingly.
So then before we get into any changes you might suggest, Lauren, what is the current policy then for processing the mail-in ballots? Because as you pointed out, it can be time-consuming and cumbersome to remove the ballots from the envelopes.
It is. It's just, you can estimate how much time it takes to process each ballot, and there's just not enough hours in a day. The only change to the law since October of 19 was in 2022, and our state legislator required continuous processing of those ballots. So if it's going to take multiple days, they start at 7 a.m. on election day, and they're not allowed to stop. You have to have staffing 24/7 as the law is currently written, which is unnecessarily burdensome on our already taxed election officials. So right now, this is the rule. I think you'll see less people voting by mail because the pandemic conditions aren't there. So it seems like mail-in balloting has settled to around 25-30% of the vote. And our election officials should be able to process those probably by Wednesday evening is what we're hearing. But even any kind of delay after election day or first thing in the morning following election day really does cause people to question the integrity of the election. Like, why can Florida get their results out, but Pennsylvania can't? They don't know that they're not allowed to start processing those ballots until 7 a.m. So, and we're fighting, that misinformation as well.
Lauren, I want to make sure I understood what you said a minute ago. You said once we do begin processing mail-in ballots, you can't stop. You have to do it nonstop. I wonder why that's included in the law. You said it was unnecessary anyway.
I do. It was included to try to force election officials to get those results out sooner. But the real change that needed to be made was allowing for the pre-processing to start before election day. That would have had the biggest. And we call for a 7-day window there. So all of the ballots that are received, starting 7 days before election day, you could take them out of the envelopes. You can start that flattening process so that they can quickly run through and be tabulated on election day.
So you do as much as possible with a mail-in ballot short of actually counting that vote. That still has to wait till election day, huh?
Yes, because you don't want anyone to leak results or to say that they're getting preliminary counts, anything like that could sway people on election day from either coming out or not, or staying.
Now, is there a deadline for counties to receive their mail-in ballots? Would that just be election day?
Yes, that's 8 p.m. on election day. That has to be received in the hands of your county election officials by that time. Postmarks don't matter. So if you had it postmarked on election day and it's received, a day or two later, your vote won't count. So
you said your organization would like to start processing the mail-in ballots 7 days before. Is there a lawmaker who can help you out and get behind that initiative?
We came very close last October.
Tell us about it.
there was an effort to get all of these fantastic changes to our laws that would address some of the unintended consequences of Act 77, things that it didn't address, like this pre-canvassing, risk limiting audits, the secrecy envelopes, that they wouldn't be required. Your vote wouldn't be tossed out if you neglected to use the secrecy envelope. The date issue, right now, the date is required. If you put your birthday or another date, you might have your vote thrown out. And that none of those things actually speak to the validity of your vote, right? That if you're a registered voter and you voted by mail, but you forgot the secrecy envelope, that doesn't feel like a reason to have your vote not counted. And thousands of people are being disenfranchised from these rules. There was an effort in October that came very close to being passed. We almost got our entire advocacy agenda there, but it kind of collapsed under the weight of its own amendments. Somebody added voter ID, a version of voter ID to that. And then someone added universal or permanent vote by mail, where you wouldn't have to apply every year like we do now, which is a good security check on that system. And then people couldn't support it. Election administrators didn't said that they couldn't get behind that, and collapse. And that was our last chance to fix any of these things before 2024.
Well, Lauren, let's talk some more about the secrecy envelope. And what it amounts to is the voter simply puts an envelope within an envelope, which on the surface of it may seem to the casual observer to be unnecessary. And what purposes is it supposed to serve anyway? Before you tell us more about your position on that.
Sure. Originally, it was for when just a handful of mail-in ballots would come in to would be submitted in each county, and that they were also submitted to your precinct. So if there's only two mail-in votes in your precinct and your neighbors who are poll workers are processing them, you would want that secrecy envelope to kind of separate your vote from your name that is on the outside of that envelope, right? That's not how we process these anymore. They all are centrally processed by the county, and the volume is such, the way that the machines open the envelopes and they're all processed, no person is looking at it. So you do have your anonymity, whether you use the secrecy envelope or not.
Oh, all mail-in ballots are opened by machine, are they?
I think in most counties, some of the smaller counties might not have that equipment, but certainly in places like Philadelphia, Allegheny County, the bigger counties.
Anyway, as you say, in the case of a machine, then there's no privacy concern, right?
No, not at all. Yeah. So, and you could also argue that you could go on election day into the voting booth and shout who you're voting for, and no one can stop you. Your vote still counts. If you yourself don't use the secrecy envelope, that could also be you, relinquishing your right to privacy on that, right? So that's your choice to not include the secrecy envelope, though most people do it, obviously accidentally.
So in the last presidential election, about how many Pennsylvanians neglected to use the secrecy envelope? And then most importantly, what happened to those votes?
We got it down to about, I think it was around 1% of votes, which is significant, or I could be lying on that. It was under 3%. And that was, we were worried if it was over that, it could honestly have swayed the election. Right. I mean, this is not an insignificant number of votes that we're talking about. And even through election cycle after election cycle, we're seeing those lists of voters. We had a low turnout election in this past November in Philadelphia, and there were still thousands of people, over 2,000 people who didn't have their vote counted. That's just not right for something that's not materially significant to whether your vote is valid or not.
So then you'll continue your efforts to eliminate the secrecy envelope is what it amounts to, Lauren?
Yes, but it's not going to happen before this election. So right now we're in a campaign to just educate people on how to properly fill out their ballot and to make sure that they're including that secrecy envelope and then also properly dating when they sign the return envelope.
Now, there was another bump in the road that was observed that applied to mail-in ballots last election, and we talked about the secrecy envelope. Now I'm talking about the dates. The voters expected to handwrite a date on the ballot. Some people neglected to put that date on their ballot. What happened to those votes?
They were not counted. If you didn't put the date on your ballot, it wasn't counted. For a time, you could put any date, like some people put their birth date. you could put a date 20 years in the future, and just because there was a date on it, it would count. I think the courts have since clarified that it needs to be a date within the window of when the mail-in ballots were sent and election day, right? When it was received. But yeah, without that date, your vote won't count.
Well, how much effort did the counties put into contacting viewers, or voters rather, and saying, hey, we have your ballot, come in and date it?
There's certainly no requirement to notify people and have them come in and cure their ballots. I know counties like Philadelphia send out a list of people who have a problem with their ballot. They don't specify what it is, so that could be, missing date, a missing signature, and then people can come into their county election office, cancel that ballot, get a new ballot, vote it. And so, but that process is cumbersome. One, not everyone can get into their county election office easily. Two, that's time out of your day, right? You already felt like you voted. Why should I have to?
Sure.
And then three, if they're not clear about the process, or they think that they can just vote on a machine, things like that, there's a lot of lack of information or understanding around that process. So,
well, have we adopted a statewide policy that will count those ballots that are missing the dates for the primary coming up next month?
No, it's the same rule applies. We have not. There's some court cases.
And it sounds like it could be at the discretion of the counties then to get these fixed.
How they choose to notify people is really at the discretion of the county. So some can go above and beyond and really go out of their way to contact people and encourage them to come in. And others, can just post it on a website and not do anything to promote it.
Now, is the mail-in ballot itself, Lauren, is it the same from county to county? In other words, just how much uniformity is there in the mail-in ballot between our 67 counties?
There's a lot of similarity, of course, in places that have the language requirements. You'll see, in Philadelphia, we have a requirement that has all of the information in both Spanish and Mandarin. So ours are a little longer than in other places. And of course, they're custom to whoever's on the ballot in your area. But otherwise, the same secrecy envelope, the outer envelope, that's all pretty standard.
Lauren, let's talk about automatic voter registration. That's a fairly new invention here in Pennsylvania, and it involves when you visit PennDOT, you're able to register yourself automatically for voting. And how do you feel about that process being in place now?
So I will draw a distinction. We don't have automatic voter registration in Pennsylvania. This was a change to the motor voter law that was passed in 1993 under Bill Clinton. That made it that the DMV could register voters, so that you could register at the DMV, right? So then the change that just happened in Pennsylvania was changing it from an opt-in or from an opt-in to an opt-out. And this is one of those things. There's a Nudge, the book by Cass Sunstein, that talks about these little changes you can make to see a big impact, right? To get more people to participate. So that's what happened here. I think it's great. People are going quickly through those screens, and it's great that they're catching tens of thousands more people to register to vote, because so many people tune out of elections until a week or two before the race, and that's too late to register. So if you're not registered, or if you need it updated, this also makes sure that our rules are even more accurate, right? Because people, when they go to the DMV, right, they're using their most recent, their current address, and you have a better chance at getting up-to-date information as well.
So far as you're concerned, calling it automatic voter registration is somewhat of a misnomer. That's what I'm hearing, because you still have to do something.
Right. And in other states, that truly have automatic voter registration. It's just that you turn 18 and you're registered to vote. You don't have to get a license or a government-issued ID to be registered to vote. So that is a distinction, and there are several people fighting for that expansion in Pennsylvania. So I don't want people to think that fight has been won just yet.
Lauren, do you see any value to changing over to a truly, completely automatic voter registration? In other words, is there any hazard to letting voters disengage from the political process by letting it automatically happen?
I think requiring people to vote would be a step maybe too far, but just making sure everyone is registered would be incredible. And I can't tell you, I served on the board of the League of Women Voters, and obviously spent most of my career in trying to encourage people to be active citizens. So much volunteer out, so many volunteer hours, resources. I can't tell you the amount that we're spending just trying to get people to register to vote, catch kids when they're 18, right? Working with all of these schools, adding it to teachers' already very full plates about what they have to cover with their students because we don't have automatic voter registration. I can't imagine what good we can do with that money, time, and energy if it was already taken care of and we could focus on something else.
One more question about auto voter registration, which again, as far as you're concerned, is not so automatic because you still have to take some action with the touch screen. And speaking of that touch screen, Senator Chris Dush says that the numbers on the ballot, or rather on the touch screen, indicate yes and no, that those numbers aren't consistent, so that can ultimately cause some confusion as far as opting in or opting out of auto voter registration.
I think that's really a non-issue. I can't imagine. You're still reading the screen and then looking to see. Nobody's coming in and memorizing that they need to press 1 to opt out or 2 to opt out. I don't think they're still reading the screen and making a selection.
You still have to pay attention to the directions.
Yeah. I mean, even the same, from restaurant to restaurant, press 1 for credit, 2 for debit. You have to read it every time. You don't just automatically go in knowing you're going to press a number. So I would compare it.
Lauren, earlier in our program, I promised we would return to the subject of poll workers and poll watchers. And there are training sessions, I understand. The Committee of 70 and the League of Women Voters of Pennsylvania are working together on this. So talk about these training sessions. Just what do they cover?
We call them information sessions because only the counties can do official trainings, but they came out of 2020, right? We had so many of our poll workers weren't able to participate, and we had so many new people enter the system as poll workers. So they needed help, right? People, it was new to them. So we partnered with the League of Women Voters. We worked with the Healthy Elections program at Stanford and MIT to create resources that would help support new poll workers and honestly longtime poll workers just understand the process and what it entailed. So it was partially a recruitment effort to just demystify the process and tell people what it would take to serve as a poll worker, but then also give them the resources they need to be successful in that role, no matter what spot they had on the election board. So we've been honing that and reiterating and improving it cycle after cycle. And I think it's pretty fantastic. And we've gotten many new faces into poll working, and that they are continuing to come back cycle after cycle, which is also, I think, a testament to the experiences that they're having and how easy it's been to jump into that role.
And let's talk about more about the experiences of the poll workers. After the election of 2020, we know that poll workers had to put up with threats and abuse. And are you aware of any stories you'd care to share with our viewers?
I think the highest profile ones were from other states, like Georgia and Michigan and other places. But in Pennsylvania, you can only serve as a poll worker in the county where you're registered. And most election administrators try to get people as close to their home precinct as possible, right? So you're really working with and for your neighbors, so that people shouldn't feel as intimidated by that. That said, it is a concern that people have. So we're in the process of adding de-escalation training. If people come in and they might fully believe that our elections are under threat and that their votes are being stolen, we want to give poll workers the tools that they need to take the tension and de-escalate that system or that conversation. So that's another round of info sessions and trainings that we're going to provide so that people can feel confident that they're going to have a good experience. By and large, people have had a perfectly fantastic time working with their neighbors and making sure our voices are heard.
Lauren, we have time to talk about one more thing. It has to do with the petitions that are required of candidates when they try to get on the ballot. And like everything, it seems, there are rules for requesting a recount of petitions. And briefly, how does that work?
So right now you have to pay a $50 filing fee for each one that you want to challenge. That rate was set in 1927 when $50 really meant something. Now it's such a nominal fee that basically you can, pay a few $1,000s and challenge so many. So we are definitely calling for an increase to $1,000 per challenge to deter those frivolous or baseless charges that are meant just to gum up the works.
Now, Lauren, that's quite an increase going from, again, considering that the first fee was established in 1924 or 1920s, anyway, about 100 years ago. So I understand the desire to want to make up for lost time, but wow, that's quite an increase. How can you justify going up to $1,000?
I think it's the amount that these candidates that are raising millions of dollars for their races, certainly at a presidential level, we're going to hit, $1 billion race this year, more than likely. They have the funds, and but it would deter, but it's an amount that's high enough that it would deter frivolous or baseless charges, right? They would have to think twice before challenging all of those petitions.
We've been talking to Lauren Cristella, President and CEO of the Committee of 70. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much for having me.